Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to 20th Century Geek. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and we will soon be joined by my co-host and guest, Julian Darius. This is part 2 of our trip down the superhero highway. We're looking at our top 10 superhero movies. We've already done some honourable mentions, some other bits and pieces, and we've done 10 down to 6. So here, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to be jumping from 5 down to 1. This is our top 5 between us. What do we think we're going to be? Well, I won't hold you back any further. I shall hand this over to myself and Julian and enjoy our top 5. Right.
Number five.
Number 5, yes. So we're really getting to the crunch of it now because we're really getting into those sort of later films.
The top 5.
Yeah, this is top 5. So number 5 for me, you said Superman 2. I am putting in Superman the movie, 1978. I agree with what you said about it not overall aging as well as some people think. But there's a sort of it's a film it moves me, this film does, in a weird way. Like it's long, like but it's almost like a biography. You sort of like watch a biopic, but this is sort of like, oh, here's the whole life of Clark leading up to this first encounter. And I love all the stuff with young Clark, when he's on the farm and when his dad dies and stuff like that, it works a lot better than when Kevin Costner gets it, let me put it that way.
No kidding.
Yeah. And so that it works because the reason obviously is it's the one thing he can't do anything about. All these superpowers, he can't sort of help someone's heart and all this other stuff. So there's something about it that just feels iconic to me. Gene Hackman as Lex Luthor, like it's Silver Age. I mean, this is Silver Age Superman. Like, it's not to be taken wholly serious. But this is where I sort of hold up certain films. We've talked about Wonder Woman, with Gal Gadot, Tobey Maguire as Spider-Man. To me, sort of like Christopher Reeve just embodied, at least as a kid, this was my entry point really to superhero films. So for me, like, Christopher Reeve just embodied Superman at that point. That sort of like, that thing of having to save people, but like integrity, but without being too schmaltzy. Like, he could kick your ass, but he was still, he still had that integrity. He didn't have to be, as you said, like, he's bigger, like he put on muscle and stuff to do the role, and he's only wearing, lycra and a bit of like stretchy cotton. So he looks fine, but he's not huge, and he doesn't have to be cut and wear a muscle suit and all this other stuff. Like, and even his performance as the sort of the almost sort of like 40s style banter between the dialogue and banter between him and Margot Kidder and stuff, as those sort of classic style reporters, is just, I love all that stuff. I really do. So no, to me, yeah, Superman the movie is just so iconic. And again, I haven't watched it in probably a couple of years, and I really should. But it just sort of, I can picture it in my head. And even the silly stuff, like when he comes out the sort of phone booth, and the sort of like the black guy comes out and he's like, that's the damn outfit. Like, it's really got that 70s vibe where you're just like, oh yeah, this is not great, but it's all done in innocence and that sort of thing. So yeah, I think it just works. For me, that film just works.
Well, it's a classic. I'm not gonna knock you for including it. I mean, it's a classic. And my instinct tells me the same thing, right? I mean, I'm not gonna knock you. I got to see it recently in theaters, and maybe a couple of years ago, and a digital projection, and it was, I didn't think that it held up as much as I wanted it to. It's also got a lot of like oddities that we kind of like forget.
Yeah.
I mean, including like Krypton is like in another galaxy, like when he when he goes to, I love the Fortress of Solitude. I mean, I love the, crystal technology. I love all this stuff. When he makes the Fortress of Solitude, and he there's this sort of like, 2001-esque kind of sequence as he creates a Fortress of Solitude and like unites with the um, intelligence of
Yes.
Krypton that's still in the crystals. What everybody forgets is there is a line that makes it crystal clear, so to speak, that he has been astral projected through the cosmos
Yeah.
for untold years, and that's why he's like aged between the two shots. Like, I mean,
Oh,
that's bad. I mean, there's
oh,
stuff that,
it's biblical,
but
isn't it? It's Jesus being in the desert for things like this is coming back. It's stupid. I
yeah,
agree.
I
Yeah,
mean, there's stuff like that doesn't hold up so
yeah.
great. I mean, but yeah, no, it's a classic, and I'm with you on not. I just want to say, I'm with you on Chris Reeves. I also want to say that I love what you say about him. Sure, he buffed up for the role. His Clark Kent is my Clark Kent.
Yeah.
He is my Superman. And to me, he has that sense of grace.
Yes.
And you can have those shots of him flying around, and yes, of course, it looks like he's on a dolly,
Yeah.
but
You
but
believe you'll believe a man can fly around a studio. That's what it sort of. Yeah. Yeah.
well, but I mean, they were doing it before, long
Mm.
before anyone else, and it still looks good. But he has a sense of grace. It's that Miracle Man thing, right? Of
Yes.
like just a
100%.
lighting in the air, as opposed to when I see these more recent Superman actors, and I think I don't want Superman to look like Thor.
Yeah.
I mean, that's fine for Thor, but that's not what Superman's supposed to look like, right? There's no amount of muscles that can lift a building, right? You know, that your muscles aren't doing the work, as it points out in Miracle Man. And so having this alien sense of grace, this sense of beauty, this sense of
Mm.
aesthetics, this lightness. Superman always had a kind of lightness to him. Thor is supposed to be a wall of a man, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Big and imposing. Superman had a lightness, almost ballerina-esque, grace to him, and that was his power.
Mm.
It was this quiet, power, this quiet beauty. And I think that just aesthetically, it really takes something away when you cast a guy who looks like Chris Hemsworth.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think that was always my thing with um, Henry Cavill, who is sort of like he looks fine. And when he's stood there, you go, yeah, fine. But he never has that same sort of. He's a bit more lumpy. He's obviously he works in other films. He's a good actor. I've enjoyed him in stuff. But yeah, Christopher Reeves has that grace. I think is a really good word to describe it. Lightness of touch. But he is a true Boy Scout. Like he is
Yeah.
going to sort of
Yeah.
he is going to take on a sort of a robbery, and he is going to get a cat out of a tree. Like he is going to do this thing, and both are just as important to him. So, no, I think it's just I can't. The one thing I cannot defend the Margot Kidder sort of like can you read my mind kind of all that sort of thing
Oh
is
no, I will defend that. That's a classic. That flight sequence is amazing, and I will defend that to the end of time. I mean, she loves him. She and can you read my mind? That's a perfectly reasonable question
no,
about a
it's
guy who can
yeah.
fly.
It's the fact of it's not so much the words, it's how long it goes on for. And
Oh.
some of the bits where I'm just like, okay, we get the point. Come on, you don't need this whole. Some of this should be edited down to this film, but other than that, I like that film. I think it's such of its time,
Mm.
and I do think we've sort of lost that. And I think when we had Man of Steel, like there's a generation that are like, no, Superman should come and kick your ass, and you're like, he doesn't need to. Like that's sort of like
No, Superman is very conscious of the fact that he could fly up into orbit and kill everyone on the planet with heat vision. Okay,
yes,
like he doesn't need to fly in with his fists.
yeah. What was the guy?
He
Superman
he's a
Returns.
god.
Like Superman Returns in like the early 2000s. I can't remember, but that like the guy who played him there got that sort of he had a similar. They were looking for a similar thing. So I think they kind of missed that as they've gone forward. But anyway, yeah. So what's your then number five?
My number five is my top Marvel film on this list, which is The Avengers 2012.
Mm,
Um, I think that it's interesting. Like Avengers is very similar to the Joker in a sense. Um, they're both sort of like they're not what I want out of a movie, but they are the best version of themselves, which is a sort of like narrow scope movie
mm.
that you can possibly imagine, right? Like if you we don't need a Marty Scorsese Joker movie, but if you had one, this is going to be directed within an inch of its life, right?
Yes.
We don't need a popcorn movie, you know, superheroes as just absurdly powerful guys who could bash each other through skyscrapers, but this is going to be that movie within an inch of its life, you know. And I think it just works. It's fun. It doesn't get at the deeper stuff that I want
Hmm.
superhero movies to get at. You know, I remember leaving it. It was the summer of Dark Knight Rises, which of course,
Yeah,
you know, I think
2012.
is a
Yeah,
big
yeah.
failure. And but I remember leaving the theaters and thinking that was as good as I could possibly imagine this movie being. It was the ultimate popcorn movie I've probably ever seen, and it was ultimately one so vapid and about nothing. And I can't wait to see Chris Nolan do it right. And then the universe made me eat those words. Um, so no, I
Yeah.
mean the Avengers. It's a classic. It's fun. If you're going to do the sort of like Guardians of the Galaxy, you know, witty, fun superhero kind of offbeat, you know, stuff that doesn't take us too seriously, this is the paragon.
Mm. Mm. I'd agree with that. Will be interesting because we are going to touch on it again. But I agree.
Mm,
No, I think you say it's the paragon of like it's that thing of like superhero films you can go for something, can make a have a message, or they can be doing something with a character, um really pushing, or they can be just like, this is a summer event movie, like it's just like they'd have like a summer event comic, and we're really going to try and give you that sensation of like, these are like your superheroes as you want them to be. They are good guys. We're going to try and remove that complexity for now, and you're just going to have um, a ball, and just sort of like it
mm.
presents that almost like perfect comic book to me, which may allude to where it is. But like, yeah, no, I think the Avengers is a good pick, and I will be touching on it a bit more later.
Yeah, I think it's the sort of classic MCU film for a reason. Like all
Mm,
other MCU films are trying to do this,
yeah,
right? They're trying to do exactly this kind of genie in the bottle, fun. You know, even the stuff that doesn't quite work, like it's a quip that doesn't quite work or whatever, you're still like, that's charming and doesn't take itself so seriously. And what am I out like 2 seconds of my life? On to the next thing. Um, and I
yeah.
think that is like the quintessential MCU
Well,
feel
it was
for
also
it.
like, I think it's the culmination, it's the feel of it.
Mm,
Like, one of the things I think the MCU has been very successful at is, at least, well, phase the first, they call it the Infinity Saga. So that first
mm,
sort of like up to Endgame. One of the things it knew, it was like, we're building to this moment where we're gonna have payoff after payoff. Like, in some of it, sort of overblown a little bit, but payoff after payoff. And the Avengers was the first one that did that, where you're like, you've had phase one, we've given you Iron Man and Iron Man 2, you've had Thor, and now, and then we've given you Captain America First Avenger. And the First Avenger didn't have a post-credit scene. Its post-credit scene is a trailer for the
mm.
Avengers. And I remember being sat in the cinemas, having watched Captain America, just watching this trailer and being like, "Oh shit, they're doing it! Like, this is serious. Like, they're actually like, this looks really good. They're going for it." And it just sort of felt like an event. It felt like an event. It, like,
Don't
truly
forget
felt like
Hulk.
an.
Hulk's in there too. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. You
But
had like
you're right. I mean, and I think much more than I'm not a fan of the way that whole, Infinity War kind of stuff, the whole Thanos stuff
mm,
winds up, none of that works for me. But this works for me. And
mm,
this is, seeing them all together and seeing the magic of those characters all together. And some of those movies preceding it are okay, and some of them are horrible. But hey, they made those fucking movies, right?
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
I mean, nobody thought they could ever do that. They made those movies. And this is the magic where you see it coming together. You see, this, and the irony is this is the Justice League, right?
yeah,
This is the Justice League model. It's like, you have all those characters established. They make sense on their own. Now we're going to put them all together. That was much more the Justice League model than it
mm,
was, the Avengers. But they did it first as in a movie in the Avengers, and damned if it doesn't work.
yeah. No, I agree. It works for a reason. Okay, so that's our number fives. Number four, hit me with your number four.
Superman Returns.
We
So
just yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
2006. Yeah, so Superman Returns, much for all of the reasons we were talking about Chris Reeves. Um, I think Brandon Routh is the guy. Obviously, look, they should have continued with Superman Returns. Structurally, it's a little bit of a mess, but again, you cannot imagine better casting.
Mm,
This is the guy who should have played Superman. This is, Lois. This is, the whole set, the whole thing. Um, all of the stuff that you talked about, how much you love Superman and how it triggers the nostalgia stuff, I agree with. This movie does all of that
yeah.
for me. It manages to trigger all of that, but why I have so much admiration for it is it does all of that. It still updates its look, it updates its feel. It looks amazing, but then it takes the superhero story in a new direction that it's never been taken. And I think that in contrast to like the MCU films, we just talked about the Avengers and how like you're talking about stuck in that second act,
Mm-hmm.
right? This is a movie that refuses to be stuck in a second act. This is a movie that says, right, Superman's got a kid and, time's going to pass and the newness of everybody loves Superman is going to fade. He left for 5 years. He's got a kid. How do you deal with being a parent if you're Superman? How do you understand these responsibilities and how do you deal with, the other thing is the love interest that whether it's Spider-Man, whether it's, uh, Lois Lane, we always have these kind of like iconic love interests. Well, you get married or you don't, but fast forward 5-10 years, it's not going to be perfect anymore. It's, we get to see these characters in their honeymoon phase. And by Superman Returns, we're after the honeymoon phase. She's over it. And I think that is really beautiful, and it really pushes the superhero into these uncomfortable new spaces, these brave new spaces, while also showing what made those classic Superman movies work, and that you can do that in a modern aesthetic and get it right. This is the movie that gets it right. It made as much money as Man of Steel.
Mm-hmm.
It should have been the basis of a DC universe instead of being thrown out, and we get a crummy version of it in Man of Steel.
Yeah.
I would love to see, there's an alternate timeline in which they decided to stick with this and do the Zod movie as, Superman Returns 2. And I would have gotten, a lot better. Brandon Routh teaming up with, Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman. I mean, we would have gotten some really cool stuff. So
I think it's an interesting film. It's an interesting film, and I like. I haven't watched it for a while, but it's one of those films that when it works, it really works. And you're right. I was remember his name, but yeah, Brandon Routh is excellent. When they introduce it starts to get clunky towards the end when you have like mopey Superman sort of like floating around, and then they introduce the kid, and then all of a sudden, then the kid's got super strength, and you're like, hang on, this is coming a bit too quick for me. You've done quite a long film, but you still sort of seem to be cramming stuff in. So you're right, the pacing sort of feels weird. And it's one of those where I think they hadn't really figured out how to do, let's call them legacy sequels at this point, where they're like, and we're going to do the same plot, and we're going to have Kevin Spacey play Lex Luthor, but we're going to lean into the stuff I love in 1978, and one of the reasons I love it. But they update a lot of it. But Kevin Spacey is a bit of an oddball in this, where I'm like, some scenes I love what he's doing, others it feels a little bit like, oh, this feels a bit weird. And so, yeah, it never quite lands, or at least parts of it don't land enough for me. But it almost feels like they were aiming for a much longer story. Well, they clearly were, because they set up a bunch of loose threads that never get resolved within the film. And I would have loved to have seen a follow up to this. So it would never make my top 10. I've got to say, but it's a bravo effort though for bringing back a Superman and going, oh, we're going to do this. I mean, Bryan Singer sort of bringing it back and going, we're going to follow the Christopher Reeve. Ignore 3 and 4. I mean, this is what Halloween did, and other films have done, haven't they? Like the Terminator franchise has done it a number of times. Forget those films. This follows on from. Like this was like, oh, this follows on from 1 and 2. I think was the idea. Maybe I don't know. Maybe even just 1.
Right. No, it's 1 and 2.
Yeah.
And explicitly, Zod was going to be in the sequel. That was the whole thing. It's like you do X-Men and then you do X2, and you've got a little more confidence, a little more budget. You can do the big drama stuff.
So it would have been interesting to see where it went. You say about a follow-up, just to throw in there, because I don't know if you've ever seen it. There was the Arrowverse, the CW channel did all the Arrow films. The Arrow, the Flash, Supergirl, bunch of other stuff, Batwoman, the Flash. They did a Crisis on Infinite Earth storyline, and obviously Brandon Routh came back to play Ray Palmer, the Atom, and I loved him in Legends of Tomorrow. I actually think that's one of my favorite of the Arrow shows. But they also did one where they've got a new guy playing Superman whose name escapes me right now. But they went to an alternate universe and they did the Fallen. Is it called Fallen Kingdom?
Kingdom Come.
Kingdom Come. Thank you very much. They did the Kingdom Come style Superman where he's got like the black background on the S and he's a bit older and he's got the grey hair. And this was supposed to have bit that was sort of indicating, we're going to do Kingdom Come, but that is from the 2006 Superman Returns. So we're going to just continue that forwards, and it's become the thing, and it's a wonderful moment and cameo, and they use him really well. But the problem with it is you do watch it and you watch Brandon Routh and you just go, yeah, we really missed a shot. Like we missed something special here. Like we really missed something special here. Like, all you're doing is showing me like what I could have had. And it's really unfortunate.
Well, I feel that way. I would just say that, you said like they hadn't quite got the legacy thing right. I think this is my template for doing the legacy thing. When I see all these legacy movies, that try to introduce like the next generation, but they're trying to keep the original character the same and not let that character evolve, right? It's like, Indiana Jones gets married and has a kid, but then he's got to lose him because we got to keep reverting him to the classic Indiana, even if we're going to take him in a new direction and end the franchise, right?
Yeah.
We've got to constantly revert so that we can take them in a new direction. Superman Returns takes him in a new direction and shows him getting old and melancholy, and it's still the same, optimistic Superman, but it's got this like beautiful melancholy streak. I think the whole, it's funny you mentioned the Margot Kidder, flying sequence. I think the flying sequence in Superman Returns, which is explicitly a reference to that, is one of the most beautiful things ever put on celluloid. I think it is, it makes me cry every time. It is so beautifully melancholy, to remember this magical moment in which somebody loved you, right? In the throes of new love. And, of course, you were the Superman to them, but time has passed and it's melancholy, but still so beautiful. And I don't know many moments in film period, but certainly in superhero movies that captures that kind of, beautiful nuance of happiness and melancholy at the same time. It's stuff like that. So.
No, that's a good point. Good film. Okay.
So, your number 4.
Number 4. Yeah. Captain America, the Winter Soldier. This is, for me, like I said, I think the Captain America trilogy is an odd one because it sort of expands. Obviously, you get Civil War as the third one, but this one leans into that Ed Brubaker series, which is quintessential Captain America. Like I absolutely adore that run that he did and the introduction of Bucky Barnes back as the Winter Soldier and all this other stuff. And the fact that this is it is a superhero film. Like Captain America is definitely a superhero, but then to have this sort of to do it in this, not so grounded, but to introduce this sort of like everyone saw it's like a spy film. It has those elements. It definitely has those elements, but this feels putting Captain America on the run, having him to face sort of like Bucky, and they bring back, and the design of the Winter Soldier is ace. But the choreography in this, it's just sort of like it's almost just a fantastic action film in and of itself as well. And it sort of it has the heart as well. Like, this is you've had the first Captain America film is a pulpy adventure film. Like it looks that way. They can't use bullets because they've got laser guns, and Hugo Weaving playing the Red Skull, who I think is wonderful, but like is a bit arch and is playing it very much sort of like in that vein. But this is like Hydra. This is about the sort of this is Smersh or Spectre or those kinds of things hiding out in plain sight. This fear of the enemy within. But just the way the pacing works and everything, like this is Captain America at his height. This is the Wolverine, that I really wanted. Like it still ends in the big shooty bang bang, but I like it in this. But I also like the relationship of how they introduce the Falcon. They introduce sort of like Sam in this as well, and again, just sort of. I also think this is the best. This film gives us the best version of the Black Widow as well. Beyond this, sort of like she becomes incredibly choppy as a character. I think of all the characters, I think Scarlett Johansson got yanked the most from idea to idea, unfortunately. But to me, yeah, this is almost like peak MCU. Like you could take it out of the MCU and it's just a really good, solid superhero film. You're going to blow me down, aren't
you? No. I mean, I remember liking it when I saw it and thinking, that was a pretty solid, espionage movie. It's doing the superhero espionage movie. I think, part of the problem with espionage movies, and I'm a big fan of them, but part of the problem of them is that I sort of don't remember them after I'm done, that they don't sort of like stick in my memory in the same way that other movies do. And this is sort of the same way, where I sort of remember, like I like this, I thought, well, that was a good movie. And I just sort of thought, well, it didn't amount to much, or it didn't, stick in my memory in the same way. So I don't remember it super well. I remember liking it. I mean, some of the stuff, the action sequences work. I mean, the Bucky Barnes stuff doesn't work as well for me, but it's solid, right? The thing that really bothers me about this movie is within the context of the MCU, this is at the end, they reveal all of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s files, right?
Yeah.
So the whole world knows who Black Widow is. They know they know everything that S.H.I.E.L.D. has ever done. There will never be any movie or TV show after this in which S.H.I.E.L.D. has a secret. And I know that the MCU kept to that because the whole idea is it's a shared universe, right?
Yeah, I can't defend that. No, you are right, and it's one of those weird ones that sort of comes up when the plot requires it. Like later down the line, that there are sort of like in films, there's like drop lines where they're like, following this sort of like the expulsion of Hydra and the release of the secrets, we now know this, and then it's just not mentioned again. Then like 4 films later, someone else has sort of mentioned it. So it was sporadic. I think it was a little early to do that. But no, you say about the espionage film, I agree. One of the things that sort of sticks into me about this film, you say about things that mean things, superhero films that mean things, sort of thing. Like one of the things I like about this film is I liked when superheroes are at their peak. You get the amount of origin films we get and stuff, because you've got to start somewhere. But this is like Cap at his peak. Like this is post Avengers. You know, he's established in the new time. He's now part of Shield. He's going on these missions. He's doing his thing. Like, you know, he's having this. He's building relationships and sort of forming these things. And he's sort of to him, he's like, well, I'm part of this organization. Like, we won a good war in World War II. Like, you know, we beat the Nazis, we beat Hydra. And then to be confronted with the fact that, well, actually, you sort of didn't, and there were compromises after you were gone, and it's resulted in this and this, and you know, we're still here, and actually we're you know, we've been directing things. I love that. I've been confronted with all that stuff you thought you had done, and it was all good, but it wasn't as honest, or it wasn't as clean as you thought it was. I find kind of interesting as well. So yeah, no, it works for me. It's a really sort of, it's just solid. It's one of the films I do watch these quite a lot. Actually, it's a frequent watch.
It's a good movie. I'll admit it's a good movie. I think you mentioned it was sort of peak MCU. I would say, to me, like, the Avengers is sort of peak MCU.
Yeah,
Captain America: Winter Soldier is sort of like post peak, but it's doing what I think the MCU would have had to do to survive. You know, if it artistically, which is move into other genres, right? Say, okay, you know, you can do. There's no reason why you can't do a great espionage movie. You know, a Jean-Luc Carré film. You know, with Captain America. That's absolutely what you need to be doing. And this is, you know, this is the film that kind of pointed in that direction, which obviously was completely abandoned in favor of, you know, churning out
homogenization.
schlock.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but you know, so I mean, I think this stands in my mind as sort of like, sort of one of the post-peak kind of like ways the MCU could have gone, and sort of been more interesting or artistically successful for me.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's a cover what you could have won, and I think this is the problem. I think the MCU did become a bit homogenized, and even like beyond the Infinity Sagas, they've gone forward. They sort of like tried to dip into this again, and they've gone like, we're giving you a kung fu film with Shang-Chi, and you go, awesome. So we're gonna have, like, you know, like a proper kung fu style movie. Yeah, and then you watch it and you're like, this isn't. This is a Marvel movie with kung fu in it. Like, you know, this isn't what you promised me. And then, you know, they do it again and again.
Yeah,
And
this
like,
this makes the Iron Fist, you know, Netflix series look good.
yeah, yeah. The end of Shang-Chi is awful. But anyway, that, you know, on no one's list. Yes, that's my number 4. So should we jump to I'm going to jump to number 3 straight away. My number 3 is going to be interesting because I think it's maybe closer to number 1 for you, but The Dark Knight is my number 3. This is like 2008. I think this was about the same year as Iron Man. This is a fantastic film. Again, this is that sort of like same as like Spider-Man 2, isn't it? It's that it's at the peak. It gets everything, pretty much everything, kind of right, and everything works in this film. You know, it's established a world. You know, it's not going to be too fantastical. It's going to have all these elements, and it's going to sort of like try and stick to those rules. Not everything works. I think you and I both sort of say like that. I think we've said about the sonar thing at the end is a bit silly, but I get it within the construct of this film. And also, I look back on the question of like, who's the best Batman and all this other stuff, and I think that's almost a bit. It almost is silly in the context, because it's like, well, the best Batman has to exist in the best world. You know, sort of like you couldn't lift Christian Bale and place him in a Tim Burton world. Like, it wouldn't work. You know, you couldn't then place Michael Keaton into Batman v Superman. Like, it wouldn't. Well, they tried it. It didn't work. Like, you need those. It's the elements that surround the Batman are the bits that actually sort of make it what it is. And I feel that sometimes like The Dark Knight feels like almost like the most realized. It's the most real, but it's almost the most realized world for Batman to exist in. And also, obviously, Heath Ledger's Joker has become iconic. You know, his performance is fantastic. It's, you know, even if I'm sort of like, I want this need to move away, and I know he's got a painted face. I'm like, for fuck's sake, just bleach his skin. Like, you know, just you know, I want that Brian Bolland kind of like look. Someone just give me the Brian Bolland sort of Joker, for God's sake. But yeah, everything works in this, and even sort of like the Two-Face and all that sort of stuff. It all sort of kind of works for me. So, the only thing I would say about this, it weirdly sort of sets up becoming a second origin film in a weird kind of way. So the first one establishes Batman, and then they're like, everyone's pro Batman. Oh, we've really got to turn the world against Batman for this other stuff. So it becomes like a new status quo, which
Yes.
is a little bit, I'm like, oh, okay, but it's a bit of a
Well,
pain.
so let's talk about that. I mean, yeah, I mean, this is a masterpiece of film. I
Mm,
will say that it ends much better than it begins, right? It's got
mm,
a 5 act structure, which is very unconventional. We talked about Superman having 3 acts and Superman 2 having 2 acts. Together those two movies are a 5 act structure, but not a classic one. This is a much more sort of classic 5 act structure. But the first, and it's half an hour, half an hour, half an hour, half an
mm.
hour, half an hour. But the first act is actually really lackluster. And I don't feel a lot during that heist, the Joker heist at the beginning. And the whole point is capturing the mobster's accountant in
Mm.
Hong Kong, is sort of the climax. And then you know it's not really the classic Joker that we remember. Isn't really there until the third act,
Yeah.
until he's sort of arrested and everything else. He's still trying to scam the mob. He's still the guy who we never saw at the end of Batman Begins with the playing card, who's just really a hoodlum, who wants money. By the end, he's burning money. He's a totally different character. He's got a real arc, which people don't acknowledge. When Alfred says some people just want to watch the world burn, that's not who the Joker is. That's who the Joker becomes.
Well, yeah, 100%.
And
Because I say, what's funny is you're right. Because one of his first lines he says when he's introduced is, "If you're good at something, don't do it for free."
right, yeah, and he's robbing a bank, right?
Yeah.
And he's intimidating the mob, and he says, "I want like 50%, of everything, right? I'm
Mm.
going to be the new kingpin." Um, that's not the same guy who says like, I mean, obviously he says, plans, they scheme and have
Yeah.
plans. I'm a dog chasing a car, you know. Um, that's not correct. Of course he's a schemer. So I think that there are ways in which we misunderstand Dark Knight and
Mm.
we misunderstand that Joker. Having said that, there's a reason why it's a classic. I think you're right that it almost has the second origin story of sort of him being hunted at the end, right?
Yeah.
Why I like that. I mean, I don't know that it should unfold in exactly this way, but um, but it knows that the best Batman that Batman sort of needs to be outside the law. And so I think at its best, Dark Knight is kind of a philosophical experiment, not just with the Joker as an anarchist who's not going to follow the rules, and how does Batman deal with that, but also obviously Two-Face. The whole title of the movie is about Two-Face. It's about the White Knight. It's
Mm.
about the fact that what the world needs, what Gotham needs, is a politician who cleans things up, right? Somebody who plays within the system and fixes the system, not a vigilante outside the system that's
Mm.
never going to fix this. The movie knows that. It's interrogating the superhero. It's interrogating what Batman is. And its conclusion ultimately is, Batman can't be the White Knight. He can't be the White Knight light. He can't be the 1960s guy with a badge,
Yeah.
working with a commissioner. He's got to be on the outside of the law. And so I think you're right. That doesn't really work as like a second origin story. Like what it really should do is he should be on the outs of the law from day one until at some point in the future where he and the commissioner make nice. There's a little bit of a weirdness there, and I think that ultimately comes out in Dark Knight Rises, that basically
Mm.
there's no way to take this plot. I mean, Dark Knight Rises destroys this movie
Yeah.
because the entire point is we can hunt him, he can take it. Well, except he just walked away,
Yeah.
retired.
Yeah.
Like that's the exact opposite of what you said at the end of this movie. But that doesn't take anything away from by the end of this movie, all the pieces have come together, all of the people imitating Batman and having just really been vigilantes, well, that's the Dark Knight. That's
Mm.
the guy who, what he's inspired. That's not what Gotham needs. All of it is like, a chess match that all the pieces come together in this really beautiful way in that ending. And yeah, so obviously I'm going to mention it. It's not
Yeah.
on my list, but
No, you're right, and that's the thing I do like. Yeah, the one thing is you say about this Dark Knight and Dark Knight Rises. Dark Knight Rises is the title of the third film, but the third film we get should be the fourth film.
yeah, at least.
Yeah, like there's a film missing in this sequence, and I've always felt that like
Mm-hmm.
because you say like he needs to be hunted, and he goes, no, I don't, I'm done, I'm out, and you're like, well, you've just left the city in a mess. Like, surely there's a mission to
Yeah.
complete here. Like,
Harvey Dent's gone, and Batman just took a walk because he couldn't be exactly who
yeah.
he wanted to be. Yeah.
So yeah, it does. It sort of leaves threads that never really get addressed, which is a shame.
Yeah, I agree with you.
But you're right. I think this film does follow a fascinating. I think fascinating structure. I think it's paced really well. I disagree a little bit with the beginning. I think the way I agree the ending is with sort of like some of the way it sort of presents sort of things. So the end is really good, but the way it builds as well, I think is sort of like you say, the jigsaw pieces. It's chess piece. Like it sort of works throughout. There are things moving all the time throughout this. And so yeah, I just think it actually works incredibly well. And much like I've said with this, like it stands alone from the genre. Like it works just as a sort of like you go, oh, it's just a good film. Like it's just a really good film. But one of the things I find most fascinating that's interesting is apart from Christian Bale, all the good guys, we always talk about the villains. Cillian Murphy as Scarecrow is the only one that appears in all three films.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And I love the fact that sort of Scarecrow barely gets mentioned when we ever mention these films, but he's the most consistent person in Gotham as a villain. And so, it's a nice little thing that sort of Nolan did that throughout. I enjoy that.
Well, and really, the arc of Batman is about Ra's al Ghul, who trained him, and obviously Talia comes back in the third, and it's the revenge of, the League of Shadows and all that. I mean, there is a through line there, but that makes Dark Knight the weird one, right?
Yeah.
And thematically, like, I don't know, it's a weird trilogy. Thematically, like the Scarecrow, it makes sense as the through line because Batman is all about imposing fear on people, right? And scaring them. But then they don't really seem to do a lot with him. And it's like, well, we've lost the Narrows at the end of Batman Begins. And then Dark Knight starts, and it's like, right, a third of your city just went insane. What are you going to do about that? Nothing. We're going to drop that because I've got this really cool story to tell you about the Joker. And then Dark Knight Rises starts, and it's like, right, we don't really want to follow any of that. 5 years later,
Yeah.
let's do Dark Knight Returns. Yeah,
Yeah.
it is a little weird.
There's a missing film in this. There's a sort of a 2.5, if you will, they say, where someone comes in and takes advantage of the chaos that's left in the wake of Harvey Dent's death, and these other things happening.
Yeah.
You have a penguin come into power or something like that. Using corruption and that sort of thing. I don't know. It just feels like there's a bit of a gap. There's a story missing in the whole overall structure. But The Dark Knight is still a fantastic film.
Agreed.
What was your number three?
My number three, and this might surprise you, is Watchmen.
I wondered if this was going to come up.
Yes. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, Watchmen, the film, if you ignore the comic, right? If all we had was the movie, nobody would have stopped gushing about Watchmen. Watchmen would have been the masterpiece that showed the world what you can do with superheroes and superhero movies. Is it a little on the nose? Sure. Does it need to be probably even longer? Sure. Is it a little Zack Snyder? You know,
A
like I don't
little.
need night. Well, I mean, the thing is, like, Zack Snyder fought to keep shots in here and ideas in here.
Yeah,
The thing
yeah,
about
yeah.
Zack Snyder is, like, every time you read an interview with Zack Snyder, okay, he's brilliant. He, like, Zack Snyder knew what he was doing with Man of Steel, and you know, even having the Amazons be Kryptonians, which was an idea
Mm.
that dropped. It's a brilliant idea. Brilliant idea. You know, to unify the entire mythology. I mean, he gets it. Every time you see an interview about Watchmen, like, he gets it. And then you see the actual movie and you're like, oh, you don't get anything.
Yeah.
But you know, so like Night Owl's like punching through walls. You know, like he's obviously got super strength of some sort. But then you see Snyder interviews and he's like, it's all about being realistic and, you know, gritty, but he can't resist that kind of 300 style
Mm-hmm.
thing of just loving men with huge muscles hitting things in slow motion. Um, but okay, that, you know, it's not a perfect movie, but it does have some of the best sequences of superheroes ever committed to, you know, celluloid or you know, digital movie making.
Yeah. It's one of those. I have an interesting relationship with Watchmen overall because I think I've read the comic a number of times, you know, and I think yeah, it's good. It's got really good stuff in it. I think it's you know it works kind of well. It is you know you've really got to read it. It's a novel. It's you know it works well. But there is that thing of going like, oh, I've got to kind of read it. Like I don't read it for fun. Do you know what I mean? I can't just jump in and go like, oh, I'm going to read Watchmen. Like I know some people can. I really can't do that. But the film sort of like is almost like the opposite of like where you've gone like, oh, it's you know, I've got to be focused to read the comic. I've got to because I want to take something from it and I want to read all the supplementary material, blah blah blah. But with the film, it's almost like, yeah, I can have it in the background and I'm not, you know, I'm going to look at it every now and then and go, yeah, that sequence looks amazing, but I'm not really taking anything from it. Like, you know, it's sort of, it's almost like hollow in kind of ways. But you're right, it has moments of genius, absolute genius. I think some of the casting as well, like the two I always call out is Jeffrey Dean Morgan as the comedian, and Jackie Earle Haley as Rorschach. To me, are just fantastic casting choices. I think they work phenomenal. But they also like it trips up in itself when it's sort of both of those characters are also the coolest characters in the film.
Right. You're supposed to hate them and be repulsed by them.
Yeah, but then you're just sort of like, yeah, but they're the coolest, and like you get the feeling that sort of like what you know where Zack Snyder's gone. He's gone, like, that'd be really cool. You're like, no, no, you're not supposed to want to hang out with the comedian or Rorschach. Like they should terrify you, and be yeah, you say be repulsed. And so it's just sort of like, yeah, it's that thing where you know I'm glad to watch certain scenes. Like there's that scene where sort of like you know the prison break scene with Rorschach, or like when he says to him, he says, you know, I'm not trapped in here with you, you're trapped in here with me, and all this other stuff. And the finale works. I even think the finale of this film works slightly better. The idea of using Doctor Manhattan rather than the squid thing with all the artists and all that sort of stuff works better. It's much more concise. It's much more sort of you know makes much more sense. So actually, I think he improves on the end of the story. But yeah, it's kind of like long, and some of it's really hollow, and it looks great, like a music video. So it looks great, and moments of genius. But it's also, yeah, I don't know.
It is strange. The Doctor Manhattan origin sequence with you know him on Mars and everything that whole issue, which gets like 20 some minutes in the movie, you know, if you just extracted that and showed that as like an episode, you know, of a series, you just say, I mean, what's going to beat this? This is, you know, as good as any superhero motion picture has ever got. But as you say, it's like, the next shot is sort of like, the comedian looking badass as he murders, Vietnamese civilians or something, and you're like, not sure you got the tone right,
Yeah,
like this is
100.
like Rambo 3. You need to be doing Rambo 1.
Yeah, 100%. That's exactly it. Because you talk about the Doctor Manhattan origin, and you have the whole thing with. I love that sequence where you see him evaporated or whatever, destroyed in the machine, and then the nerve ending, the nervous system turns up, or the artery system, and eventually sort of like he coalesces into this blue being, and you're like, oh, that is phenomenal, and it's sort of really interesting. And then he talks about being in Vietnam, and it's supposed to be sort of like horrific and tragic and this corruption. But yeah, the way it's filmed is exactly that. Is like the comedian's badass with a flamethrower. Look at him lighting his cigar off a flamethrower. Isn't he cool? And you're like, isn't he roasting children? Like, aren't we supposed to be like, it's like, yeah, ignore that. He looks great. You're just like, oh yeah, no, this is really not. You've not understood this scene at all. Like,
Well,
so
and
yeah,
that's the
it's
inherent
really
fascism of superheroes, right? I mean, it's
oh,
the
100%.
inherent. I
Yeah.
mean, I put the Joker on the list. I recognize,
Mm.
there's a problem here. Here's Watchmen. I recognize, part of the look. Part of why we love Batman is because there's nothing wrong with the Joker that I can't solve with these here fists.
Yeah.
Um,
Hammers of
I mean,
justice.
oh yeah, no, I mean this is very much a violent male fantasy.
Mm.
It is falling down, right? I mean
Mm.
that element of the Joker is there in every Batman story, and you have to deal with it. Watchmen, the original graphic novel, tries to deconstruct your urge toward vigilantism. Snyder knows that and sort of knows better, but he can't resist the cool image of the comedian lighting a cigarette with a flamethrower that just killed civilians. Um, it's like watching Apocalypse Now and going like, don't they look badass with Ride of the Valkyries playing? Like, no.
I really want to be Robert Duvall in Apocalypse Now. He's the character I want to be. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. No, I agree. It's a good film. It's a beautiful film. And I would say, just to sort of highlight, I think the opening sequence, which is sort of like a bit of a biography through a period of superhero stuff, like, is again in and of itself. Take that out of the film, it's just a fantastic, phenomenal sequence. Incredibly
Agreed.
well
And new
thought
to the
out.
film.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And new to the
Yeah,
film. Yeah.
yeah. I won't.
My
I won't.
number two.
Go on then.
Go
Your number
ahead.
two. No, I was gonna say I
My
wouldn't. I
number
won't
two
diss his thing, but like, go on. Number two then.
is Tim Burton's Batman, 1989.
Mine too.
Yeah. Well, yeah. It's a classic. Every line of dialogue. I mean, okay, so it's gothic. It's Burton doing but come on, man. I mean, every line of dialogue, even the stuff that doesn't make sense, right? It's like the world's first fully functioning homicidal artist.
Yeah.
No, Bob, I kind of like this one.
Yeah.
I mean, everything just is iconic now. It is classic. It's beautiful. Even the stuff that doesn't really quite make sense. So yeah, what are your thoughts?
Very much the same. It's one of those sort of as a kid, like that Batmobile for a start. Like the aesthetic of this film is insanely good. Like it's the least populated Gotham ever in some scenes, but I love the designs. I love all the matte paintings and all the stuff going on. That sort of Art Deco industrial kind of look is incredible. The score by Danny Elfman is iconic. I mean, because of this film, we got Batman the Animated Series. It sort of it holds off. It holds on to some of those sort of aesthetics. Michael Keaton is actually, I think, is great as playing quirky, weird, clearly dysfunctional Bruce Wayne. Like, I think he's really good. The fact he invented the sort of what they call the Batman twist now, because he couldn't move his head, so he had to move his everything is done at the waist. you don't. It's not until I was older that someone pointed out, and you're like, oh yeah, it just sort of looks dramatic, and he has all those like turns where into the camera or sort of to look up, and his whole body moves and sort of stuff. It just looks, intentional. It is intentional, but it looks like it's it gives these grand gestures. And so everything's iconic. Nicholson just eats every scene. It's like you say, the stuff that doesn't make sense, but even sort of him coming out, sort of doing the whole mime thing where he sort of like, kills the guy sort of like with the pen and turns the audience. He's like, the pen is truly mightier than the sword, and then sort of all the gunfire, or the end parade where he's sort of like, I'm here giving away free money. Where's the Batman? He's at home washing his tights. Yeah. and the advert, like this film is like, the advert where you've got Smilex and it's got like the dead models in it and all this other stuff. Like, the film gets dark. Like this is like a Burton really sort of going for it. This film is iconic and it made a splash for a reason. Like, it's just even the sort of the opening where you get the score, which is again I can't go over the opening score is I miss music like this, like
yes.
John Williams, scores for like Superman. We didn't mention the Superman score, but that Superman score is just rousing beyond belief. But the opening of this film where you've got the dun 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 dun, and it's going around the Batman symbol, but it's just this carved stone.
It's such a minimal opening, but it works so well. My God,
it pulls out to this stone Batman symbol. Oh yeah, it's amazing. This film's just iconic, like everything from the beginning. Some of it doesn't make sense. I'm going to acknowledge, like the fact he lets a family get mugged and then intervenes after. In the opening sequence, you're a bit like, all right, fine, but no, it's all brilliant. All of it is brilliant.
Yeah, and you mentioned the design of the Batmobile, which is still my Batmobile, more than anything, any other. But also, let's establish the Batwing. The Batwing is amazing, and I love when it's silhouetted against the moon. And that's so gimmicky, and it's everything's got to look like Batman, like the bat symbol. But damned if it doesn't work, It's such a great shot. And don't forget, this is the first Batwing. There were bat planes before, but this is the first one that's designed like that, and still the best design. Now it's downed by that ridiculous gun of the Joker, but so what, and it flies through the alleys, pulls the balloons. I mean, very silly, but, don't forget that climax, which, we mentioned when we've talked off camera of sort of, how often we hate superhero climaxes. And it's come out in sort of like, talk about Wonder Woman, some of these other films, how often the climax is a problem.
Overblown. Batman, usually overblown, aren't they?
Yeah. Batman is such a, I mean, Kim Basinger's great, first of all. And Batman is such a great example of a climax done well. First of all, it's one villain, right? Which they're smart enough to tie to his origin, right? So it's just like Ra's al Ghul, like you try to tie it all together. So it's not just Dick Tracy's going to fight this guy this week,
Yeah.
So they try to tie it all together. I think that works here. And I think, you ever dance with the devil in the pale moonlight, it works. But then this climax is just in this ridiculous, cathedral, this Gothic cathedral that's like a skyscraper tall, and it's sort of falling apart. But it's all, beautifully choreographed, and it's all charming, and it doesn't have to have. There's no explosions. There's no, and it's just damned if it doesn't work. And it remains probably, one of the most satisfying superhero climax conclusions. And it doesn't have any of those traditional elements.
Well, what I love about this is it gives you all the sort of the explodey and the punchy, but it keeps it like contained. Because it's got to be, that final confrontation has got to be Batman versus the Joker. It's got to be like that. This isn't going to be sort of like, Sky Beam and other massive things. This is just two guys going at it. A sort of like a slightly old, beyond middle age Joker, and a shorter Batman. But like, I love this ending. I love it so much. But what I love is they've sort of acknowledged you need to have some big action. So you have the plane with the balloons and all that sort of thing, and you've had all these sort of set pieces up until it keeps giving you the set pieces. And this film works. I don't know if I've said this. It works like a wrestling story, right? One of the greatest things they do is they keep tantalizing you. Like, there'll be confrontations, but you don't get the big fight until the end. Like, they'll get like Bruce Wayne meets the Joker. You want to get nuts? Oh, let's get nuts. Or Batman saves Kim Basinger, sort of like, where do you get those wonderful toys? There's no confrontation. They keep just teasing each other until the very end. But they still know they've got to give you the explodey, punchy. So you get the phenomenal sequence of the Batmobile going into Acme Chemicals, which is almost like a music video. Like, it's just sort of like, then drops the bombs. And as it's exploding behind you, you get the Elfman score giving you all that. And then you get, I say, the Batplane, and then just fighting all the villains up the stairs throughout. And all of this is done in this Burton-esque German expressionistic world, and it never wavers. And I think that is phenomenal. Yeah, it's just so good. Sorry, I've gone on a bit there.
No, I agree completely. Well, we both have it as our number two. So what's your number one?
Number one is, as I say, sort of when I think of like superhero films, it's got to be superhero-y. It's all about sort of like, that's the big thing. I'm taking it away. And so to me, my number one is The Avengers, the 2012 Avengers film. It's the culmination of their first, their phase, if you will. It was a perfect sort of crossover and culmination of those characters. You say it's not really about anything, but it works for me as both the end and the start of a story. Like, it's really works as sort of like, you could just watch the end of that and go, that's your Avengers kind of thing. But it also opens up the world by having them all meet and form relationships. But it's just like, this is what a comic book spectacular to me should look like. And I think it's helped by the casting. I think the MCU did a really good job of casting its characters. I think I've always thought Chris Evans is great as Captain America. Robert Downey Jr. I think is worked incredibly hard to hold it all together. And Chris Hemsworth just playing that sort of dumb jock kind of thing as Thor, and it works. It just works really well. And so yeah, to me, it's just like you said. I was keeping it up because it is peak MCU. This is when sort of like all, pistons were firing, and it just got it right. And this is what a superhero film should be. And like you said, this should have been what like the Justice League film should have been, which is kind of why they hired that's why they hired Joss Whedon, and it went all went a bit wrong. But this is when it works. This is sort of like perfect build up to it, and then the payoff was just really, really well done. We've already talked about it. So what about you? What's your number one?
Well, no surprise for me, number one is The Dark Knight.
Yeah.
So we've already talked about that. And I mean, for me, you're right. I can see the argument that like The Avengers is on a list of superhero movies. I mean, the sort of like, everything in the kitchen sink, approach. And yeah, I think it's trivial, but at the end of the day, I can certainly see the argument of it as the best superhero movie. I think that for me, Dark Knight is the movie that you can show anyone and say, this is an amazing movie.
Yeah.
Like, you will come away from this movie being changed, with thinking about these ideas and these characters. So for me, it's the it's the one that sort of transcends. It's obviously a superhero movie. I mean, it's not as much of the flashy Avengers thing, but it's obviously a Batman movie, right? I mean, it's not realistic. It's superheroes and supervillains fighting each other, and yet manages to transcend that, and and just be an astoundingly good movie from start to finish. I only wish that I could say the same thing of Dark Knight Rises, and that there were more, in this list like that.
Yeah, Dark Knight Rises is an odd one. It sort of needs a discussion in and of itself. Like it needs an in-depth discussion to be like, why does some parts of it work, others don't? But the Dark Knight is, as you're right, it transcends the genre and is just a fantastic film. And I think more because it came out the same year as Iron Man. I think really sort of like from Kevin Feige and Disney's point of view, I think the success of Iron Man was clearly a why they sort of moved forward the MCU. But I also think they saw the Dark Knight and were like, oh, you can do all kinds of things with this and it's going to be a success. Cool, that's a good sign for us in the future as well.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of think that, I mean, if we think about 2008, I mean, as a key year, right? That basically, like, I mean, it's interesting to me that, I sort of got like Superman Returns 2006.
Yeah.
That's the sort of like build up to, Marvel securing the money, at that time to do the MCU.
Well, that's Incredible Hulk. Right. Yeah, Incredible Hulk. Yeah, isn't it?
No, well, that is the Ang Lee one.
The Ang Lee Hulk. There. That's what I'm thinking. Right? Yeah, Hulk.
Right, but so there's this sort of like shifting period right there in 2006, 2008. For me, 2008, you're talking about like Dark Knight. Dark Knight is pointing the way in a very different direction. I think what's really sad about Dark Knight is that when you think about it and Iron Man that year, and then 2012 is the Avengers and Dark Knight Rises. Dark Knight really points the way for superheroes to do something different. I think by then we've already had a glut of superhero movies. I mean, let's not forget, by the time the MCU gets going, it gets going because there's already a glut of superhero stuff, to which it will soon contribute in great quantities.
Yeah.
Dark Knight is already at a point where it's saying, look, we've had plenty of superhero movies. Let's try to tell a fucking story. Let's try to do something different with this. Let's try to actually make a great movie, more along the lines of Captain America, the Winter Soldier. To me, Captain America, the Winter Soldier is the inheritor of Dark Knight, if anything.
Agreed.
But Dark Knight is saying, we've already seen this. Let's do it. Marvel comes around and says, no, we refuse to do anything different. We refuse to do anything good. We're not interested in that. We want to give you the popcorn stuff. And we're going to distill that into the masterpiece that is the Avengers. I acknowledge that. But, we can distill that popcorn crack, your superhero crack, into a more distilled form than ever.
Straight into your vein every couple of months. Yeah.
Exactly. And to me, that's really very sad, because ultimately that's obviously the direction we went. And, nobody's even really tried to do the Dark Knight since then.
No.
I mean, maybe the Winter Soldier, is at least trying to do an espionage movie, but nobody's really attempted, outside of Watchmen, the next year, nobody's, really gone for this kind of thing.
Well, I think the thing is, my number one, the Avengers set the template, because once they got the big, once that blew through $1 billion, and they were like, oh, the crossover movie's the thing. Well, you can see that's what happens with the studio. Warner Brothers are all over Zack Snyder. They're like, right, cool. When's the crossover coming? Oh, well, we'll do it in the next film. Okay, Batman v Superman, and it's sort of, the pressure feels. I don't care at this point with the whole MCU thing, DCEU thing. Zack Snyder feels a little bit like George Lucas. You know, when George Lucas sort of talks about what he intended for his 9-film saga back in the in the 80s, and you go, yeah, I'm sure you had a loose plan, but like this isn't, I kind of feel that with Zack Snyder when he's like, no, this is what we were going to do. The Amazons would be from Krypton, and this would happen, that would happen, and I'm like, cool. I'm sure that's exactly what you thought, but I don't think you thought that was going to happen in 4 films. I thought you were thinking 6, 7 films was going to be building up to this thing. Like Warner Brothers contracted that, and unfortunately, I think sort of much to the detriment. We're going to wrap up soon. We're sort of running very much time. One final question for all these sort of films: is there one superhero that you would like to see get the film treatment? That you think would be able to deliver something interesting, at least.
Yeah, that hasn't been done.
Possibly, or could just needs to be revisited to give it, a decent run. What would you do? You got full. I'm going to write you a blank check. What superhero are you going to do?
Well, I don't know. I mean, obviously Batman is pretty strongly represented here. Superman's pretty strongly represented here. We both think, Wonder Woman's great. We've seen good examples of that. I mean, what I think is really, sad to me is that, the MCU went in the popcorn direction and, didn't aspire to do good movies. And, I could hear people yelling already. And, DC went in this bizarre, idiosyncratic direction. And I think that really, to me, Superman Returns, I come back to as sort of like pointing the way, because what it was doing was looking back on Superman and Superman 2. I don't think you need to throw out 3 and 4 and Supergirl, but whatever. And in the same way, we've had Keaton come back for The Flash. I want to see a great Green Lantern movie. I want to see a great Flash movie. I want to see, more, Wonder Woman stuff. But I'd like to see stuff that honors what has come before it and is, either continuing that or has a reason for not, and I think Man of Steel and what we've gotten has largely not had a reason for going in a different direction, and largely failed. And kudos to Warner's for giving people the freedom to do that. But yeah, what about you?
No, I think we sort of covered this thing way back when we talked about these ideas. I think Green Lantern. I think there's scope to do something. Like you say, the cosmic side of the MCU is all very comedic. You've got the Guardians of the Galaxy, Captain Marvel, which is apparently the Marvels, which is coming, is going to be wacky. It's going to be a wacky adventure, which is how it's described. Anyone ever uses the word wacky, I'm out instantly. That is one of my icks. I'm just like, no, I'm sorry. If you're going to describe it as wacky, then I'm kind of out. But I think with the Green Lantern, the idea of the Green Lantern Corps and this sort of like space police and all this other stuff, I think there's so much there that could explore it. I'm not, don't let Jeff Johns do it. All right. Give it go a different direction. But I just think, the Green Lantern Corps and the Green Lantern sort of has got legs to do something that's really interesting, I think. Use those sci-fi tropes to say something about modern society. As we on Earth, you can do different planets, you can do all kinds of things. But I think the Green Lantern could be a way to do those kinds of things.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Anyway, we are done for today.
Rocketeer 2 coming soon.
Oh, just reboot it. Just bring me back the Rocketeer. It'll never happen. I think they've lost that. All those pulp heroes have done, unfortunately. We'll see.
Well, wait until the superheroes implode in the next couple of years, and give it 5 years, and we'll have the Shadow back, or the Rocketeer or something like that. I
wouldn't complain. I really wouldn't complain. I'd be amazed. Yeah. Not just the MCU. We're going to have Warren Beatty physically implode, and then someone can get the rights back to Dick Tracy as well. But yes, anyway, but Julian, thank you very much for coming on 20th Century Geek and doing this. It's been really good fun to do this. But ladies and gentlemen, let us know. What are your top 10? What's your top 1, top 5? Let us know. what your thoughts are on top 10 superhero films of all time. Are we off? Are we close? I think some of the ones, might be contentious. Others, I think, are very much sort of on the money. But anyway, let us know. Find us at 20th Century Geek on X and all other social medias, Facebook, Instagram, Threads. I'm on them all. We're out there. Come find us. And of course, if you really like what we're doing, leave a review and check out the Patreon. There's a link down below. And go check out the sister podcast, which you probably listen to anyway. Stories. God almighty, my brain's gone, it's late. Stories Out of Time and Space, where Julian and I discuss sci-fi films and other things. We've literally just we're working our way through Black Mirror episode by episode for our inter-season retrospective, and it's a doozy. Go check that out. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, Julian, thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. And we shall see you on the next episode.